Good evening. Tonight, we're going to talk about faith and rationality, or faith and rationalism. Is faith rational? Or is a rational person able to have faith? That's a very interesting question that kind of raises some other issues in our mind. There are some people out there who would actually say that faith is irrational, or at least non-rational. For some, it is almost wishful thinking. Faith is more of the mind and not of the heart. Fideists believe that faith is irrational, or at least non-rational, but it's still okay to believe. I don't know how that makes sense, but that's what they believe. So it's not rational, but it's okay to believe anyway. Can religious faith escape the charge of irrationality? That question we will discuss through the greater part of this chapter. Propositional attitude. Many consider faith to be this. It's like a thought toward a possibility. Example, I had a friend that I worked with in a lab. I was a chemist at the time, and he was a true blue Cubs fan. He loved the Chicago Cubs. And this is where the example comes in. The Cubs will win the World Series this year. He would say that year after year after year. The Cubs will win the World Series this year. Now, there are a lot of attitudes that someone can take toward that statement. You can doubt it. You can believe it. You can fear it. Or you might even hope in it. Doubt, belief, fear, and hope are propositional words that show us a certain attitude. Some philosophers say that many religious traditions, faith is either a virtue or faith is a vice. For many in the Christian faith, faith is not a virtue or a vice. Belief just is. Some have the idea that beliefs are under a voluntary control. We can either believe it or we don't have to believe it. Many believe that faith is not there for religious purposes. And it is not really belief, but more like a hope. But this is it's my feelings that the belief is the hope that moves us toward action. There are other religious believers who use the word faith to refer more to a type of personal trust. Consider someone who hates God. Think about that. Someone hates God because for him or her, God makes his or her life miserable. Or at least that's their concept. God makes his or her life miserable. So he or she spends their time defying God. So does that mean that that person has faith in God? It might be said that she takes it on faith that God exists. God exists, but she has no faith in God. That's interesting. Faith must be or might be a faithful trust. For this writer, for the writer of our text, faith is a kind of belief. Faith is, as many agree, is an opinion involving believers, even in the face of no proof or truth or evidence. Many people have a hard time distinguishing between what is true or proof and what's evidence. For many, evidence all around us, evidence all around other people, gives them a personal proof of God's existence. You look around you into the world around you, and you see all kinds of things, from the great trees of the forest all the way down to the smallest of insects crawling along the ground. In truth, faith is not based on feelings alone. Take, for example, neutrinos. I've never seen a neutrino, but neither has anybody else. Physicists have never seen a neutrino. They have never seen these particles, but they believe they're real. So that brings us to 4 characteristics of faith. Faith is believing in the absence of proof. Let me say that again. Faith is believing in the absence of proof. Faith is believing in the absence of supporting evidence. Faith is believing in the face of overwhelming counter evidence. Faith is believing something that we do not know to be true. Scientists, and I was, again, a biology and chemistry major in college, so I know all about science. Scientists believe theories, they believe theories even in the absence of proof. Richard Dawkins, a philosopher, said, faith is belief that isn't based on evidence. Again, some say faith always involves belief in the absence of evidence, but it's not always absent of evidence. There's also the belief that by many that faith means believing in cases where beliefs fall short of complete proof. We can prove a little bit, but we can't prove it completely. Faith does not rest on evidence. Let me repeat that. That's very important. Faith does not rest on evidence. Forensic evidence. What is that? It's traces of truth and testimony. Faith usually goes beyond this type of thinking. Believing goes beyond forensic evidence. In other words, I can't feel it, touch it, see it, smell it, and all that other stuff. Philosophers don't necessarily only choose forensic evidence, they choose also propositional evidence. It is not a proof, but it is believable. You can't prove it, but it's possible. Then there are perceptual beliefs, things we know because we've been taught that way. How many of us, when we were growing up, were taught 2 + 2 equals what? 4. We believe it because we've been taught 2 + 2 equals 4. Now, let's talk about the idea of moving toward more of a positive concept of faith. Faith is belief in the absence of direct evidence. Pretty strong. Faith is the belief in the absence of direct evidence. St. Thomas Aquinas says faith is not, let me repeat that, he says is not, nor does it have to be based on reason. He says faith is based on authority and testimony. Wow. For Christians and the Christian belief, faith is grounded in the testimony of the believers and the authority of the Scripture. The writer of our text say there is no reason to decide religious faith. There is no reason to decide religious faith cannot be grounded in evidence. And I agree. Faith can go beyond something we can prove. There are some examples in the world where faith seems to be out of place, such as the idea that faith is not necessarily required to know that the earth revolves around the sun, right? We know that. We accept that by faith. Faith is necessary when there is such a large degree of underdetermination. There is a common sense idea that faith comes in degrees. Sometimes believing requires a great deal of faith. But the question is raised, is faith rational? that will often depend on the circumstances surrounding the belief. From one moment, let's talk about the disadvantage to the concept of faith. Faith is present even in cases where belief is strongly backed by evidence. Believing by faith is not so different from believing by reason. Faith, let's talk about faith and rationality. Faith can be rational. Some philosophers believe the idea that belief can be rational, and it can also be seen and it can be measured. Now, I'm not sure about that. Evidentialism. Faith and belief has to be rational and supported by evidence beyond mere belief. Others would argue that religious belief depends on our ability to produce arguments. And once we argue and get the argument out there, then we can support it with our arguments. A belief is rational if it meets two requirements. Number one, it is produced by reliable use of the brain. Interesting. It is produced by a reliable use of the brain. We don't just simply grab it out of thin air. The person who holds that belief, that the belief is in any, if they believe that belief in any way is irrational, that is realism. Realists hold to the truth that not everything is supported by evidence. Evidentialism. Evidentialism. There has to be supporting evidence of the belief. There has to be supporting evidence of the belief, or the belief is not valid. To this type of believer, there has to be evidence to believe, historical or otherwise. Stories won't do. There has to be specific evidence in order for them to believe. Example, Linus. I don't know how many of you all actually like Charlie Brown. I really like Charlie Brown. I like the cartoons every year. Linus in the pumpkin patch is waiting for the great pumpkin. No evidence of belief there. And for most people, the great pumpkin and the ideal of a great pumpkin is ridiculous. And there is good reason to doubt its existence because there's no true evidence of its existence. For religious belief reliabilists, there's a big difference. For this group, there's the concept that historically people have a keen awareness of God. This leads the community of believers to share their own same experiences. This is how I've been touched. This is how I've been touched. This is how I've been touched. To share experiences in a community can lead to shared beliefs. To be sure, there's no way to be independent when checking the validity of an experience. In other words, what I experience, no one else would be able to say, yeah, that really did happen. That could have happened. It's mine. It happened to me. And it comes by faith and not necessarily by validity. Basic belief refers to any belief that is not held on the basis of other beliefs. Example, if you believe if there's an elephant in the room, that's a basic belief because it is not based on any other belief. And experience does not justify belief. The writers of the text disagree. They disagree with the concept of evidentialism because it demands too much. They say it leads to very few, if any, justified beliefs. The writers concur in the field of religion is filled with disharmony. And they concur that the world and the field of religion is filled with widespread disagreement. This leads the religious experience to differ with sensory experiences. Sensory experience is based on what the writers call reliable sources. According to them, it is not true for religious experience. Some say religion simply needs to be abandoned. And I really believe in my own heart that in a lot of ways, religion nowadays is being abandoned. This is what we might call religious skepticism. And that leads to the concept of religious pluralism. And that is the idea that all religions are valid. To them, religion is seen more as a crutch to lean on. Karl Marx said that religion is the opiate of the people. Somebody in pluralism would say the same thing. Then there are religious exclusivists. They deny diverse religious doctrines. They deny diverse religious practices. Almost all three major religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, have exclusive claims on religious truth. But I will tell you this. This is in my own opinion. That does not make the claims of Islam valid. Does widespread religious disagreement speak to exclusivism? No, it does not. And then finally, there's atheism, which is the belief that there is no God, or agnosticism, which says that they can't prove there's a God, they can't prove there's not a God, so therefore you go with what you believe. I have, in my very most recent years of my life, I found a lot of people who say they can't prove God, so therefore they don't really believe in God. Hope you all have a great week. I'll see you next week on video.